So what do you think about Plato?
Plato? What do you think about Garvey?
Mm, well, I think some of their ideas could be the same or similar.
We should explore it.
Yeah, let's do that.
Ancient Rome and the Harlem Renaissance were both periods of great intellectual, cultural, and artistic development.
They were. In fact, ancient Greece was a northeastern Mediterranean civilization that lasted from the Greek Dark Ages, the 12th to the 9th centuries BC, to the end of classical antiquity, and mainly consisted of city-states and communities that all shared a similar culture and language.
Prior to the Roman period, most of these regions were officially unified under the Kingdom of Macedon from 338 to 323 BCE. The kingdom was governed by the royal Argead dynasty, which was followed by the Antipatrid and the Antigonid dynasties. You like how I said that? I really practiced hard. It was home to the ancient Macedonians, which was the earliest known kingdom on the northeastern part of the Greek peninsula.
The ancient Greek culture made important contributions to philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, medicine, literature, theater, sculpture, and architecture. The classical Greek culture, especially philosophy, had a powerful influence on ancient Rome, which carried a version of itself throughout the Mediterranean and much of Europe.
For this reason, ancient Greece is generally considered the cradle of Western civilization, the seminal culture from which the modern West derives many of its founding ideas in politics, philosophy, science, and art.
The Harlem Renaissance came along over 2,000 years later at the end of World War I and at the onset of the Great Depression in 1917, which ended with the Harlem Race Riot of 1935.
The northern Manhattan neighborhood of Harlem was meant to be an upper-class white neighborhood in the 1880s, but rapid overdevelopment led to empty buildings and desperate landlords seeking to fill them. So in the early 1900s, a few middle-class black families from another neighborhood known as Black Bohemia moved to Harlem, and other black families followed.
Now, some white residents initially fought to keep African Americans out of the area, but failing, many whites eventually fled. Shortly after blacks started moving to Harlem, the first Great Migration began, and this led to a population boom between 1910 and 1940, not only in New York, but as well other northern cities as well.
Other factors contributing to the population shift in Harlem was the boll weevil infestation of 1915 and 1916. Cotton crops were ravaged in the South, resulting in black workers and sharecroppers being put out of work. During and after World War I, immigration to the United States fell drastically, and seeing no other option to remedy a worker shortage, northern factory owners headed south to entice black workers to move north and come to work for their companies.
Additionally, many blacks were eager to escape the racial violence of the Jim Crow South and to pursue the economic and educational opportunities that the North offered. So by 1920, some 300,000 African Americans from the South had moved north, and Harlem was one of the most popular destinations for these families.
The Harlem Renaissance was a time of cultural revival for African American music, dance, art, literature, theater, politics, and scholarship. Artists expressed their pride in black identity and culture and their awareness of inequality and discrimination. This period set the stage for the civil rights movement and the black arts movement and left a lasting impression on the cultures of the United States, Europe, and Africa.
Now, out of each of these time periods emerged two great thinkers, the great philosopher Plato and the great revolutionary Marcus Garvey. You may think they were worlds apart, and in many ways they were.
However, though each lived in very different societies and time periods, they shared strikingly similar ideas on leadership, societal structure, and the future of humanity. So grab a snack, sit back,
Yeah.
and let's get philosophical. Welcome back to our channel. I'm Haas.
I'm Cece.
Today we got a hot topic for you. Plato was born somewhere around 428 or 427 BCE in Athens to a wealthy and politically powerful family. Athens at the time of Plato's birth was embroiled in a political upheaval involving the city-states of Athens and Sparta and their allies. This political unrest had recently manifested itself around 431 BCE in the outbreak of armed hostilities and the commencement of a disastrous civil war known as the Peloponnesian War, which lasted from 431 BCE to around 404 BCE. This war shattered the Athenian Empire, practically destroying the governments of all the Greek city-states and resulted in anarchy.
Thus, Plato grew to young adulthood surrounded by the strife of civil war, and he witnessed several revolutions in Athens. He saw a government of democrats, the rule of the many, replaced by an oligarchy, which of course we know is the rule of the chosen few, which was then again replaced by the Democrats.
Marcus Mosiah Garvey, Jr. was born on August 17, 1887, in St. Ann's Bay, Jamaica. His father was a stone mason, and his mother was a domestic servant. His birth took place shortly after Queen Victoria's Golden Jubilee, and he grew up as a black colonial during the Edwardian era. The Edwardian era corresponds to the reign of King Edward VII in Great Britain, whose short-lived governance from 1901 to 1910 followed Victoria's long reign and preceded the modern House of Windsor in England.
The Edwardian age was a time where Britain was at its imperial height. 1 in 3 of the world's population were her subjects. On the other side of the Atlantic, Americans were experiencing newfound wealth and indulging in cuisine, and fashion, and entertainment, and travel as never before. Young Garvey grew up keenly aware of the contrast of these opulent lifestyles with those of most of Britain's other subjects, such as most of the people that he knew growing up in Jamaica. He also arrived at maturity at a time when Ireland was seeking their own independence from the British crown. The Irish nationalist movement had a partial influence on Garvey's thinking on blacks having dominion over themselves. Plato tells us in a letter that he wrote when he was 60 years old that in his youth he had hoped to become actively involved in politics, chiefly because he thought it was his social duty. However, once Plato had witnessed the self-serving policies and greed by the politicians of that time, Plato was deeply disappointed and shocked by the violence he saw done to his own people, and soon became disillusioned.
Rather than exercising governments for the people and their welfare, these politicians seem to only care about advancing their own agendas. I want no part of this.
Around this same time, Plato witnessed a series of politically motivated maneuvers and fabrications brought against his old friend and teacher, Socrates. Plato saw very clearly that the charges brought against Socrates were unjust and feared the outcome of those charges.
Plato wondered,
can justice be achieved for Socrates? Indeed, how might justice be achieved for every citizen of the state?
However, there would be no justice for Socrates, and he was put to death in 399 BCE.
After his death, Plato decided that he had had enough of politics and left Athens. And according to Hermodorus, one of Plato's students, he spent the next few years traveling in Greece, Egypt, and Italy.
Again, the letter that Plato wrote when he was 60 tells us that he went to Italy and Sicily when he was 40. But the gluttony and sexual debauchery he found there disgusted him, and he resolved to spend his time in the study of philosophy like his teacher Socrates.
Plato believed that a just and uncorrupted state as a political reality could not be formed until citizens arrived at an understanding of what constitutes justice and the good life as concepts. Plato returned to Athens and founded a school known as the Academy. The Academy became the predecessor to what we know as the modern university, hence the words academic. This academy laid the foundation for which most Western thought is built.
Garvey arrived at the age of political maturity in an era of the Nationalist Revolution in Ireland and the October Revolution in Russia. In 1910, at age 21, he left home in Jamaica after being blacklisted as an anti-colonial trade unionist who the British authorities considered dangerous. Armed with only a fiery spirit, he arrived on the shores of Limon on the Caribbean coast of Costa Rica.
Marcus Garvey soon found work as a timekeeper on a banana plantation for the United Fruit Company. While he worked, he witnessed in horror the oppression that West Indian immigrants, who were descendants of slaves like himself, faced when working in the banana plantations, many of which were transnational U.S. corporations.
Most black and non-white workers were paid in silver. Everybody else was paid in gold. Whereas gold employees received $87 per month, silver employees were paid 10 cents per hour. Gold and silver employees went to different hospitals, rode different labor trains, and their children went to different schools. And they even had to use different restrooms and water fountains.
Upset by the treatment of Afro-descendants, Garvey started speaking out, but wasn't taken seriously by local West Indian elites. So he started spreading his radical thoughts as an editor for a local newspaper called The Nation.
When the newspaper headquarters was burned to the ground by racist local firemen, Garvey found no solidarity or support to bring the newspaper back to life. Therefore, he left Central America discouraged, but was well aware of the struggles the people of the African diaspora faced and turned his sights towards London.
While in London, Marcus Garvey worked at the offices of the African Times and Orient Review Journal under the leadership of Duse Muhammad Ali, the famous black nationalist and journalist.
He returned to Jamaica from England in July 1914, and with the help of a few associates, including Enos J. Slowly, he created the Universal Negro Improvement Association and the African Communities League, which launched on August 1st, 1914.
After surveying the racial situation in America, Garvey was convinced that integration would never happen and that only economic, political, and cultural success on the part of African Americans would bring about equality and respect. With this goal, he established the headquarters of the Universal Negro Improvement Association of the UNIA in New York in 1917 and began to spread a message of black nationalism.
So now, guys, we're going to discuss the similarities between these two greats. Both Garvey and Plato had strong visions for what an ideal society should look like. Plato believed in a society led by philosopher kings who are wise leaders, chosen not for wealth or power, but for their wisdom. A belief in the capacity of human mind to attain the truth and to use that truth for the rational, virtuous ordering of human affairs.
Indeed, my friend, wisdom and virtue should guide society. Those with knowledge and virtue should rule, not those hungry for power.
In his book, The Republic, he talks about a three-class system: rulers, guardians, and producers.
Garvey's philosophy was rooted in a deep understanding of the African diasporic experience and how historical and systemic forces had distorted black people's sense of self-worth and identity. He argued that black people needed to reclaim their cultural heritage and develop a sense of pride and self-awareness that would enable them to resist the forces of oppression. I want my people to know they are kings and queens in their own right. We don't need to rely on others to lead us. We can build our own future.
On the other hand, he wanted a united society based on pride and self-sufficiency for African descendants. He believed in creating a structure of empowerment within the black community to stand independently and proudly. At times, Garvey's strong pro-black rhetoric made him a controversial figure in and out of the black community, especially as he challenged major thought leaders such as W.E.B. Du Bois.
Though Garvey and Plato had different approaches, they agreed that society should have strong, virtuous leadership.
The second similarity between these two greats is education. Garvey believed that knowledge was the key to uplifting the black community and encouraged education as a way to gain self-respect and self-worth. He even started schools and programs to promote this idea.
Through education, my people can reach the greatness of their ancestors and lead themselves to freedom. Plato thought similarly in that he argued that the path to wisdom and virtue comes from education.
Yes, through understanding and reason, one finds truth. Only through knowledge can society achieve justice.
So here we go again. Both Garvey and Plato believed in empowering people through knowledge. Education was a tool for freedom and self-governance.
The third way Marcus Garvey and Plato paralleled was through unity and the importance of community.
Together, we are strong. A unified people can achieve anything. Marcus Garvey was all about unity. His Back to Africa movement encouraged African descendants worldwide to reconnect with their heritage and build a sense of community.
Likewise, Plato emphasized the importance of unity in the state, as each citizen's role was crucial to maintaining harmony in society.
Yes, a state is only as strong as the unity of its citizens. Only when all members work together can justice thrive.
Both saw the strength of unity with their people being a core part of achieving their visions.
So now, guys, last but not least, we got to talk about eugenics.
Both Plato and Garvey envisioned societies improved by careful attention to the character of the individuals within it, though their methods and intentions differed vastly, especially when considered in their unique historical and cultural context.
Plato's The Republic outlines a structured society where the ruling class, the philosopher kings, would ideally be guided by wisdom, virtue, and knowledge. Plato introduces a concept that some interpret as a proto-eugenic idea, suggesting that within this ideal state, marriage and reproduction should be regulated to produce an elite virtuous class. He believed that selective breeding would allow the best traits such as courage, intelligence, and temperance to be more present in society's leaders and protectors.
Now, this was not eugenics in the modern sense, which developed as a movement in the 19th and 20th centuries that focused on genetics and biological determinism. Instead, Plato's idea was largely philosophical and focused on cultivating virtue rather than genetic purity. However, his ideas about controlling reproduction and focusing on desirable traits in the leadership class can be seen as a philosophical precursor to eugenic thought. However, his thought process aimed at creating social harmony and stability through selective propagation of character traits.
Marcus Garvey's thoughts on human potential and societal upliftment took a different direction, one rooted in empowerment rather than selective breeding or social engineering. Garvey advocated for self-improvement and resilience within the Black community, often promoting pride in African heritage and self-sufficiency as ways to combat the systemic oppression faced by the people of African descent. He emphasized racial pride and unity, but did not advocate for eugenics in the sense of controlling or manipulating reproduction based on desirable traits.
While Garvey was committed to improving conditions and the future of African descendants worldwide, his approach was largely educational, social, and cultural. He believed that through education, economic independence, and a collective return to African roots, Black people could rise above the circumstances created by colonialism and systemic racism. His focus was on the mental and cultural upliftment, aiming to dispel the internalized inferiority created by colonialism.
However, Garvey did have a controversial stance on intermarriage. He discouraged it, not out of a belief in racial hierarchy or purity, but rather as part of his goal of black empowerment and unity, arguing that African descendants should focus on their cultural unity and preservation. This viewpoint has sometimes been conflated with eugenics, but Garvey's motivations were driven by his political and cultural ambitions rather than scientific ideas about heredity or improvement of genetic stock.
While neither's ideas align with modern eugenic movements, they each considered ways that they could create an ideal society and that could be strengthened through specific qualities and values.
Though the circumstances and duration are disputed, somewhere around 399 BCE and 388 BCE, Plato was enslaved.
The prevailing belief is that Plato was sold into slavery after becoming involved in the politics of Syracuse. Dionysius was a vicious tyrant who transformed Syracuse into the most powerful city in the Greek world, with an empire extending from Sicily to Italy to the Adriatic islands of Issa.
Dionysius became suspicious of Plato and had him placed under house arrest. Plato was eventually sold into slavery, but was recognized at a slave market in Aegina and purchased by Anicarus, a Cyrenaic philosopher. Plato eventually returned to Athens and his academy, where he remained until his death around 348 BCE. Plato died somewhere between the ages of 81 and 84, on the same day he was born. Like much of the facts of his life, the circumstances of his death are also not clear. One account says he died at a wedding feast, while another says he simply passed away peacefully in his sleep.
A third account, recorded in Philodemus' History of the Academy, suggests that Plato died in his bed while a young Thracian slave girl played the flute to him. Despite being on the brink of death, Plato supposedly listened attentively, critiqued the girl for her rhythm, and then quietly died.
In 1919, Garvey was shot 4 times with a .38 caliber revolver in an assassination attempt. The would-be assassin, George Tyler, was soon apprehended but committed suicide by leaping from the 3rd floor of a Harlem jail.
Now, it was never revealed why he tried to kill Garvey, but pressure from J. Edgar Hoover and his department's investigations, along with negative press and complaints from stockholders, soon led Garvey to gaining a reputation as a swindler.
In 1922, Marcus Garvey was charged with mail fraud in connection with a ship on the Black Star Line. It's called the Orion. A year later, Garvey was convicted and sent to Atlanta Federal Penitentiary for the maximum term of 5 years.
Amidst protests from Black Americans over the fairness of the evidence leading to the conviction, the last year of his sentence was commuted by President Coolidge. In 1927, he was released and promptly deported from the United States to Jamaica, where he continued his UNIA work and political activism before moving to London in 1935. He died on June 10, 1940, after multiple strokes.
Plato and Garvey's visions didn't just stop with their lives. Garvey's ideas have continued to inspire leaders in civil rights and Black empowerment, while Plato's philosophy is still foundational in politics and the study of philosophy and ethics today.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, here's the takeaway. Whether it's Garvey's dream of an empowered Black community or Plato's vision of a society led by virtue, both men were trying to build something better. They believed in the potential of every individual to rise to greatness. And honestly, we could all learn a little from both of them.
That's right. So that's a wrap on today's Philosophical Showdown, Adventure Seekers. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button. And if you like some discourse, tell us what you thought in the comments.
Absolutely.
What surprised you most about the Marcus Garvey and Plato Philosophical Showdown? And on the other side of that, who else would you like to see us cover? But until next time, as always, Adventure Seekers, stay true to yourselves, be patient with your neighbors, keep your minds sharp, and be the change you want to see in the world.
Peace.
Peace.